Was the MVP of fantasy football leagues, and who was the biggest bust? We hand out our 2024 superlatives and give you our divisional round, NFL best bets, all this and more. It's the IBT podcast coming right at you.
I've been going dummy, out of bounds, putting on a clinic. Stick around, carrots in my hardware. KC, caught him in the crosshair. Look at me. Been the guy calling Mr. MVP. Keep your ass on the bench by my MPC. Earn my stripes like I fixed this league. Your dog's on the turf, my dog's in the street. You can find me somewhere in between. Never a dull moment like a movie scene. About to do the ops like I did this beat. Let them keep talking RG3. Coming to you live. This is the In Between Fantasy Football Podcast.
All right. It is Tuesday, January 14th, 2025, and this is the In Between Fantasy Football Podcast, your place for both a refreshing and feel-good take on fantasy football and NFL gambling. Tonight, we officially close the door on the 2024 fantasy football season. As we hand out our 2024 superlatives, we'll also keep in the gambling ring with our best bets of the divisional round. I'm your host, Seth Wilcock. Coming off pretty okay betting week, boys. Saved by Saquon Barkley. Thank you very much. But we're going to keep swinging because that's what we do here at IBT. And no, I'm not alone. I'm joined by a man who warned me not to trust the Chargers, but I went against him either way. He's a light ranch and big business son of a bitch, Eric Romoff. Pal, how are the vibes down there in the Lone Star State after the huge win for the Texans and the end of the Mike McCarthy era and Big D?
Man, the vibes are high. The betting week was much better for yours truly. You went 3 for 3 on the bets that I put out here on the In Between Fantasy Football Podcast. So hopefully,
it's hot.
People out there tailed me. I'm also in the midst of working through my flu game. I'm out here through sleet, through snow, through dark of night to make sure that the IBT fam gets what they need this week.
We appreciate you, man. Thanks for making an appearance as always. Hopefully you can stay hot this week in the gambling circuits. We're also joined by our NFL and entertainment betting expert, a guy who I just found out has 2 freaking beach houses in the continental U.S., Boston's boy, Steve Lawson. What's going on, Steve?
Not much. I mean, vibes are high here. We're getting a new coach in Mike Vrabel up in New England. So life's good, and I'm gonna be down at the beach down in Florida come tomorrow. So
nice to know.
Yeah, gotta get away for the 1-year anniversary. So
there you go. We're also joined by the Bill Cower of this particular program, Yinzer Ginger audio engineer, coach Kyle Scott behind the scenes. Bud, how are the incredible people of the Berg doing right now following a beatdown in Baltimore?
Well, I can tell you it is hockey season in Pittsburgh. We got little kids in the neighborhood ice skating on the rivers, and no one cares about football anymore.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Throw my my hat in that bin as well. I woke up Sunday morning and said, well, it's officially NASCAR season, because that's how I feel with both my teams eliminated from the college football playoffs and the NFL playoffs. And before we officially pop the top off on this episode, shout out to the IBT family. We're hard at work at bringing you guys some pretty sick shit coming into 2025. So excited to share that with you next month. So please like this video if you enjoy this type of content. Also, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Looks like we got Albert hanging out with us already. What's going on, Albert? Good to see you, man. Saying good evening, IBT. Good evening to you, Albert. We appreciate you, man. And what do you guys say? Should we go ahead and jump right into it and close this book on the 2024 fantasy football season?
Yeah, it's time to say goodbye.
Let's do it.
Temperature check.
That's really spicy. Holy shit.
All right, we are handing out our 2024 Fantasy Football Awards. We got 3 categories. We could have done a whole show on this, but I feel like it gets repetitive after a while. So let's bang out 3 good categories here. The Fantasy MVP. We're also going to be looking at the biggest bust and, of course, the best value as well. Steve, how you feeling coming into this? You feeling giving? You feeling spiteful? Like, what are the vibes like right now?
Well, you know me, Seth. I pretty much live my life off of spite. I've accomplished everything I have in life just to spite people who told me I couldn't. I one time pushed a man off a bridge just to watch him fall. So spite is the only way I know how to live. But
That's assault, Nomi.
what's that?
That's assault.
Well, you know what? I'm feeling good today, and I think it's time we give some love to people who got us to where we needed to get to, brought us to the promised land,
Yeah.
brought us to our championships, won us some money. It's time to handle some love and awards.
Eric, I was a little bummed out doing this, to be honest, because I was like, man, didn't have a lot of Jamar Chase, didn't have a lot of the players we talked about, and then definitely had my handful, share of these busts that we're going to talk about too.
Yeah, I mean these retrospective shows are always a little bittersweet, right? Because you can look at names like for me, Chuba Hubbard, that was on basically every single successful
Yeah.
team that I had, and then you look at names that are, in the bust category that absolutely dragged you down. But
Yeah.
this is where we sharpen our axe, right? This is where we identify what made these guys great and who we should target for next year.
Let's start at the fantasy football MVP. The nominees are Jamar Chase, huge difference maker at the wide receiver position, wide receiver 1 on the season. He averaged 23.7 points per game. That's really important because that's 5 more than the next wide receiver. He was hands above everybody this season. Triple crown winner, 175 targets, almost 130 receptions, 1,700 yards, 17 touchdowns, average ADP of 7 overall. And he was the wide receiver 4, being drafted behind CD, behind Tyreek, behind Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra some places. So a great deal that you got on Chase, even though it cost you a first-round pick for him. Chuba Hubbard also making the nominee list. Maybe the best bang for your buck at running back, gentlemen. RB13, 16.1 points per game, nearly 1,200 rushing yards, 43 receptions, and 11 total touchdowns for Chuba Hubbard. He had an average ADP of 129 overall, RB42. So you got a locked and loaded RB1 at an RB4 price tag with Chuba Hubbard. I think that's why he made your guys' MVP list. Brock Bowers, for the second year in a row, rookie tight end, tips the scales. Tight end 1 overall, tight end 3 in points per game, 15.5 points per game, over 150 targets, 112 receptions, nearly 1,200 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns for the Georgia product. Average ADP of 95 overall. He was the tight end 1 or tight end 11 drafted, finishes as the tight end 1. Saquon Barkley, meanwhile, this is the kind of season for a running back, guys, that I feel like we only see, once in a decade. RB1 in points per game. Career high, 345 carries, 2,000 rushing yards, 15 total touchdowns, average ADP of 9 overall, RB4. And then George Kittle, he'll round out our list here. Just a real solid season for the Kidler. One constant that you could trust each and every week for the San Francisco offense. Tight end 1 in points per game, 78 receptions, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, and an average ADP of 53. Eric, what's your thoughts on this overall board here? And Chuba Hubbard was someone I feel like you were extremely high on for this award.
Yeah, I had a ton of exposure to Chuba Hubbard, so exposing my own bias, I like it when the guys that are doing well for me get a little bit of hardware at the end of the season. But honestly, all 5 of these guys are legitimate difference makers, right? You mentioned with Jamar Chase just how far ahead he was of the wide receiver too. You can kind of say that with really all of these guys, whether it is lapping the field or whether it is just returning insane value relative to where they were drafted. And I mean, if you had probably 2 or 3 of these, you had a competitive team.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Steve, what are your thoughts on Barkley here? Because he was someone I think I had higher in my own fantasy MVP rankings as compared to consensus here, kind of dropping him in our overall final voting.
Yeah, and it's actually surprising because normally when someone has a first round grade, I do not give them fantasy MVP. It's hard to
Yeah,
win the MVP when you're already being considered a first round pick.
I
But
agree.
Jamar Chase, in my opinion, was it because of the gap between him and the next guy. You weren't getting that from Saquon Barkley. I don't even think he was the running back 1 on the season.
As Gibbs.
When you can't give him that, when you can't say you were the number 1 guy and you were
RB1 in points per game though, 22.2. But he sat out that last week. That's what hurt him.
right, but I don't think he was like lapping the competition. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
No.
he had a pretty deep position. Chuba Hubbard was very good, in my opinion, was more deserving of the award because he was drafted so late. To be the MVP, it's a combination of value and production. And I think that's what Jamar Chase, Chuba Hubbard, Brock Bowers, and other guys had above Saquon.
Who was it that had George Kittle on their list? Was it you, Steve, or was that Eric, or was it both of you? Because I know there was some George Kittle love out there, and I felt like you got a solid deal on George Kittle, like tight end 6. You took him in the mid rounds, which, we kind of hate doing on this program. We're growing to learn. But what are you guys' thoughts on Kittle here also on our MVP list?
Yeah, Kittle was my addition, and I think the thinking here is just going back to draft season. There was a clear cliff after those first 5 tight ends off the board, where George Kittle was the 6th, right? So he was that 6th tight end to have his name called, but it was a good 2 rounds later than all of the early guys, right? So going down and not using that high draft capital on a onesie position is something that I will continue to preach. And all George Kittle did was go out and completely deliver. Like you mentioned, number 1 tight end in terms of points per game, almost 16. And this was in a season where there were a few guys, some of them that are on this graphic, that were, right around that 15 mark. And then everyone else was like 8 to 12 pretty regularly. So you definitely found the diamond in the rough if you drafted Kittle.
Steve, your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I don't think he was on my list. I can't remember exactly, but I think I had Bowers and not Kittle. I think Kittle was a great value this year. Like tight end, honestly, because we thought coming into the season was such a deep position, and it turned out it was actually just shit outside of like 4 guys that, I could have gotten behind anyone. Honestly, someone who I thought would appear on this list, and even my list that didn't, was Jonnu Smith.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, good point. Good point.
You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't even drafted. Like, no one drafted Jonnu Smith.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a fair point, right? Like, as I was putting together my list, I was not only looking at guys that produced above expectation, but also guys that got hot and stayed hot down the stretch run, right?
Yeah, that almost hurt Jamar Chase for me. Like,
exactly,
I almost took it away from Jamar Chase because if you had him in the playoffs, you may not have done too well.
Well, let's talk about Jamar Chase. We did award him our fantasy football MVP, and Eric, I believe this award really goes to Chase because of that difference making at the wide receiver position. Like, it was a fine year at wide receiver, I would say, but we didn't have a lot of any wide receivers who were averaging over 20 points per game, a lot of inconsistencies. And while Chase definitely had his down games, specifically towards the end of the season, I mean, he had some bazooka games and really consistent bar once he got going.
Yeah, I mean, down games are relative, right? For the playoffs, he finished with 18.4, 19.2, and 22.4 fantasy points in those 3 games, right? So, like, you will happily take that on a playoff team. Yeah. Obviously, it's not the 45 spot that he's shown us is on his range, but it's that cap, right? In total points, he's wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, Justin Jefferson. Both of them played an entire 17 games. Almost a full 100 points ahead of Justin Jefferson. And you toggle it over to average, and he's got a good 5.5 points on Puka Nacua, who's number 2 in points per game, right?
Played half the season, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Chase, we've been saying it for years now. There's going to be a point where Joe Burrow plays a full complement of games and he throws for about 5,000 yards, and that's when we're going to see his ceiling. And that's exactly what happened, right? Just over 4,900 yards. They were both out there the entirety of the season. And, while you had to spend pretty significant draft capital to acquire him, I don't think that that should be a disqualifying point from the fact that he just completely lapped the field.
Steve, if we're drafting today's Jamar Chase the 101 in redrafts next year, PPR?
Probably not.
Who is?
Not. Honestly, probably Saquon Barkley. I mean, there's no reason for him not to be. He's not that old. I mean, I don't want to think he's old. He's younger than me. And I think while Jamar Chase did really well this year, I think his games where he disappeared, like, he had such big games that it did cover up for the fact that he wasn't there for the start of the season and he could kind of fade in and out. I don't know. I still don't love the idea of relying on a wide receiver to carry you. And if you're the 101, I think you need a running back still, especially with bell cow running backs being a thing. They tend to just be more sure in the game plan, right? Like, they're going to get their touches. You want to have that security.
Sure.
You don't want a defense to be able to bracket a receiver and take him out of the game.
I will say though, if there's no T. Higgins next year too, I think that's going to make the rose tinted glasses on Jamar Chase, and I think he will probably be that consensus 101. I would
But I think
have to bet.
I would caution our viewers and listeners that when we saw Chase struggle, typically was in games where T. Higgins was not there.
Yeah.
So take that for what you will, because with no T. Higgins, that means a lot of double looks, over the top safety looks on Jamar Chase.
Certainly. All right, well, let's go ahead. Let's get into our next category here. We are going to talk about the biggest value, the best value, and it starts with Brian Thomas Jr. I had a lot of BTJ exposure this season, but I think even this exceeded my range of outcomes for him. Wide receiver 12 in points per game, wide receiver 4 overall. Huge games down the stretch with Mac Jones at quarterback. He was really a league winner, nearly 1,300 receiving yards, leading all rookies, 10 touchdowns. And you got Brian Thomas Jr. at a great value, 118th overall, average ADP, wide receiver 48. And we also have Ladd McConkey coming in here as well. Another league winner down the stretch, in my opinion, wide receiver 12 overall, wide receiver 19 in points per game. 82 receptions, over 1,100 yards for Ladd McConkey as a rookie as well, 7 touchdowns, drafted 44th for wide receivers, 101 overall. And then Chase Brown, one of my personal favorites. You guys know I've been high on Chase Brown for quite some time now, since his days back in Champaign. I never really had a doubt that he would emerge as a featured back, but just how much he was dependent on down the stretch was awesome for fantasy managers. 1,350 total yards, 54 receptions, 11 total touchdowns, RB14 in points per game, drafted as the RB36, 108th overall. Alvin Kamara, career high, 950 rushing yards this season. Also had his usual 68 receptions, 500 receiving yards. Went for the RB15 price tag and finishes the RB5. And James Cook also mentioned here as a nominee, 18 total touchdowns, another 1,000 yards, 250 yards receiving, made him a fantasy stud, RB11 points per game. Steve, what are your takeaways of this list as a whole, and who was someone that you thought maybe should be the best value?
Yeah, I like Brian Thomas Jr., but I still think I'd probably flip him McConkey at this point for best value. Although Brian Thomas Jr. was the wide receiver 1 down the home stretch. In the last 4 games of the season, he was the wide receiver 1. So maybe he did deserve it. I know I gave some love to James Cook in my rankings as well, because he was like a 4th, 5th round pick, and you were getting like late first, early second round value out of him, which is great. Same thing with Kamara. I mean, take away the injuries, and Kamara is having an absolute monster season. It's crazy to me that this man has never rushed for 1,000 yards in a season. That's kind of wild to me, considering like Najee Harris has done it 4 times in a row. And to say Alvin Kamara never has is wild. Chase Brown's, he's all right on here. I don't know.
Dude, I think Chase Brown.
I love that. I don't think I had him on my rankings.
Brother. Okay. Well, first of all, I think James Cook is hard to call a value because his range in ADP was really, really high. Like I felt like on some platforms, underdog, you could get James Cook in the 4th, 5th round. And then when it came to my redrafts, I even saw him go in the 2nd round a couple times, which like feels right for where he finished. So James Cook's a tough one for me. Eric, I think Chase Brown has a very viable argument, just considering that he gave you RB1 production a lot like Chuba Hubbard, and he was drafted outside the top 100 picks.
Yeah, I like how this one looks for Chase Brown personally, right? Especially from that like midpoint of the season where things really just took off, right? We get to week 8 or so, and Cincinnati just basically said they're only going to give him the ball, and he took this massive opportunity share and just turned in top 10 performance after top 10 performance. He did have a couple of, quote unquote down games. One of them was in the playoffs, 14 points. Not going to kill you, but not what you want to see. But ultimately a guy that you were getting, in the middle to late rounds. A lot of people had Zach Moss ahead of Chase Brown. And if you went the other way, you got a guy that can, could absolutely vault you to a title.
Got a zig when everyone's zagging, baby. That was Chase Brown this year, and was glad to have him on quite a few teams. Wish I had him on in more. I know I took Austin Eckler over him in Scott Fishbowl, the live draft, and I think the beers were talking to me a little bit. I talked myself into Austin Eckler for the return yards, which he was fine, but Chase Brown was an absolute stud. All right, we're going to give it to Brian Thomas Jr., though. Loved what he did this season. I think he really was the best value for your buck. You got, as Steve said, the wide receiver 1 down the stretch. You got a wide receiver 1 in general on the season. So I think BTJ, even with Mac Jones, proved himself quite a bit here. I think he's deserving. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think he's deserving. I think this is a good pick.
Any final thoughts on BTJ, Eric, and where will you be drafting him next year?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because both Brian Thomas Jr. and Ladd McConkey are probably going to be flip-flopping in everyone's rankings as we get into draft season. I think you can make a case for a little bit more of a floor with Ladd McConkey, but the ceiling for BTJ and why he won this award is just unreal. And the context that he's doing this with, the corpse of Mac Jones there in Jacksonville.
Mac Jones looked pretty
feisty.
Really, I liked what we saw.
He did, Mac. Right? I think part of it is like, if you have an LSU receiver that you can just chuck it up to, like you feel you look pretty solid if you're willing to uncork it, right? So I do think that the upside and in turn the ADP should be a little bit higher for Brian Thomas Jr. But these two guys, watching their career arc over the next 5 to 7 to 8 years is going to be awesome.
Are we thinking Ladd and BTJ are going to be like late second, early thirds, especially probably in best ball once that kicks off, Eric? Is that probably what you see their ADP being?
I would think they'd probably go higher. I think they're like early to mid seconds overall. The real question is whether or not the Chargers bring in another receiver.
Yeah.
If they don't, then I can see Ladd getting steamed up to like that pick, 13, 14 range, which is probably where Brian Thomas Jr. is going to land, honestly.
Oh,
I don't know. I think there's some rookie wide receivers that are in their class with them and some guys that are coming into the league. I think they'll still be a late second, early third. Like, I don't think most people will draft Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of, say, Malik Neighbors, right? Like, I think Malik Neighbors will still go ahead of Brian Thomas Jr. and Ladd McConkey, along with guys like Amon-Ra, Justin
Malik's
Jefferson,
probably an early
Luka,
second round pick, a late first round pick.
Right, but you have to look
though.
at it like this, right? CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua,
Sure.
Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, these guys are all going to go ahead of these guys. It's just going to push them to the late second, early third, just because we've only seen them do it once, right?
Okay.
I think the real consideration here is how much of a cliff there appears to be at running back, right? All of those receivers that you rattled off are categorically great. I think there are only 3 or 4 running backs that are owed and project as a first round pick overall, right? So it's really more about the market.
Coming in. I think Genty coming in adds another one to that market. I think.
Yeah, true.
I think with the return of CMC, he's up there. Like, I just don't see a path to them going that early, especially where tight ends also go early. And now Brock Bowers is so good. George Kittle is still so good. Like, I mean,
we'll see. We'll see. I'm excited because I think we'll learn a lot here in a very short amount of times. I know, like, really, kind of right after the Super Bowl, I know Underdog will have some contests out there, so we'll be looking at ADP here in just a couple months. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel, hanging out with us. Let's go ahead, though. Let's move forward to our final category of the night. We're going to be giving away the award for the biggest bust. And tough one for anyone who drafted any of these motherfuckers. Marvin Harrison Jr., the promised one, did not deliver. Kind of like the Man of Steel, like movie franchise, like that whole thing. Like, I was kind of like, oh, Smallville, that was a banger. Can we get something like that on script? No. So same with Marvin Harrison Jr. Wide receiver 42 in points per game, 62 receptions, 885 yards. Like, that's fine. But in a year when 4 rookies went for over 1,000, average ADP of 16 overall, the highest of all of them, wide receiver 9 price tag, it's tough to swallow with Marv. So terrible season for him. Deebo, at least as far as what we were looking for production wise, Deebo Samuel absolutely drug you through the mud this season. If you had Deebo Samuels, I mean, oh my God. Like, the tough thing too is, like, he had a great start, so you thought he actually might be good, and then especially after Brandon Ayuk goes down, there was a lot of optimism for Deebo Samuel. Is outproduced by guys like Ricky Pearsall and And Juwan Jennings down the stretch, wide receiver 51 in points per game, 800 total yards, only 51 receptions though, and 4 touchdowns. That was really the killer. The yards was okay. Average ADP of 34 overall, wide receiver 15 price tag. Sam Laporta had a strong end of the season, guys, but I feel like by that point, it was probably too late if you got him at the ADP of tight end 1 overall. So only 1 game in the first 7 weeks in double digits, tight end 9 in points per game. Travis Etienne, from league winner to league loser. Etienne finishes RB 41 in points per game, just 8.7 points scoring average for Etienne. 12 touchdowns last year, down to 2 this year. Rushing yards cut in half. Career low, 800 total yards as well. Average ADP of 17 overall, RB8. And then Tyreek Hill, who honestly maybe I thought should have got more votes than he did. And when we did this exercise, I felt like you burn a top 3 pick on Tyreek Hill for wide receiver 33 in points per game, 800 fewer yards than a season ago, and was held under for 1,000 yards for the first time since 2019. Steve, am I too cryptic on Tyreek Hill, or do you have a little optimism, at least on this season that was?
I think the reason why I didn't crucify Tyreek Hill is because injuries were a big reason why he had a bad season, right? Like, and it wasn't his injury. It was that Tua went down and then the quarterback play just fell off a cliff. And it didn't look great when Tua was there, but early in the season, it was there. I mean, we were seeing that the rapport was there, and then something changed either in the game plan or Tua himself just wanting to get the ball out quicker so he didn't take the hits, that Tyreek became a little less involved. I think my vote was for Sam Laporta. I think my number 1 vote went to Sam Laporta because he was being drafted in like the 2nd round at a position that you only get 1 shot at, right? Like, you can't fix it like with someone else. You can't like back him, like, unless you like drop him usually or have a backup and then he's on your bench, so he's not contributing at all. So that's why he was my number 1. It was like a crazy overdraft when you could have had undrafted guys sub in and do significantly better than him. So
yeah,
I think that's why I was much lower on Sam Laporta this season. Marvin Harrison Jr., again, this is troublesome not only for fantasy but for real life purposes. It's not like Kyler Murray doesn't know how to get wide receivers involved. I mean, we've seen him do it. It's so I'm worried. I'm sounding the alarm, and I think, you'll buy the dip next season, and maybe he'll answer the call, or it'll be another one of these seasons, and he may just be a 850 to low 1,000s yard kind of guy in the NFL.
Eric, what are your thoughts on Deebo Samuel? We haven't touched much on him. Was a really tough guy because he kept rolling him out there thinking the opportunity would be there, but the scoring was not, the reception base was not, had a super low floor. And would you be buying the dip on Deebo Samuel in 2025?
Probably not, right? I mean, look, everyone's got a price, right? So at a certain point, I'll take a look at it. But you look at what Deebo Samuel did to your team this year, and he just absolutely tanked you, right? He splashed in a couple of 18s. He's got a 20 in there, but by and large, he's putting up 4s and 5s for the majority of the season, right? So like he's one of these kind of kryptonite players where he did just enough randomly. He would have a spike week to where you would want to keep him on your roster and consider starting him. And then he would rattle off 4 or 5 games in a row where he totaled 17 fantasy points, right? So I think the impact of him in the context of a team, really dragged down your fantasy outlook more than just kind of the underwhelming performance individually.
If nothing changes next year, guys, where does Travis Etienne get drafted? Are we talking double digit rounds?
He does not get drafted.
He gets drafted.
No, he shouldn't.
I'll take
He's not
11.
a starting running back. What other backup are you drafting?
Chase Brown.
Hey, easy. And
I mean, he was considered the backup heading in, right? Like people will continue
Etienne was still the
throw
starter.
darts at.
Etienne was still the starter. He just didn't get most rushing work. That was it.
So he wasn't the starter. I don't care who plays the first play of the game. That's not a starter.
That's technically if you look up the term starter in the dictionary, Steve, that is actually the
yeah. Well, I'm going to look at it as who's getting the playing time, right? Like, you can ceremoniously run someone out there all you want, but at the end of the day, if the coaching staff doesn't trust him, I mean, honestly, if you want a real answer, probably the 12th round, right? Like that's where you're drafting
Yeah,
ETN.
that sounds
You're
about
throwing
right.
a dart on him because is there a new coaching staff going in there? Probably, right? So yeah, there is. So because I know Ben Johnson wants to fire Trent Baalke. So like maybe, but ETN, I just don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't look good.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead then, guys. Let's hand out this award and stop talking about it. Let's give it to Marvin Harrison Jr. Look, it was a tough season for Marvin Harrison Jr. As we alluded to, 885 yards, 62 receptions. I think part of this is on Drew Petzig, the offensive coordinator, for not getting him more involved to the point where he was such a letdown for fantasy managers that by the end of the season, you really weren't playing him probably if you're in the playoffs, like realistically. So, Eric, where are you drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. next season? What do you think the ADP looks like? Because I'd say he's probably falling if nothing changes there in Arizona, third, fourth round, like you back in.
Yeah, I would feel okay at like the end of the fourth and into the fifth, right? Look,
Oh,
I've
I
said
don't know
it.
if he'll go there. I think
No,
the
I
hype's
don't
gonna
think he
get
will either, right? I won't
catch
get to
back,
him.
right?
But like I said on this show forever, happiness is a function of expectations. You draft a guy like this, around the 1-2 turn, and he puts up this type of season, and you're very mad, right? You go get this type of guy around like the 5-6 turn, and he
Mhm.
gets 800 or so yards as a rookie, and you're probably pretty okay with it, right? So I think the market will adjust. It probably won't adjust to the point where I feel comfortable clicking the button, but maybe it does, and where it does, I will.
Okay. Would you rather have him or George Pickens next year, assuming the Steelers don't add a stud receiver?
I'd probably
Me,
go George Pickens.
Steve?
I'd go Marvin Harrison.
Zay Flowers?
Zay Flowers
Zay
over
Flowers.
Marvin Harrison.
What about in my latest mock draft, I have the wide receiver, the true wide receiver one, if you don't count Travis Hunter, Ted McMillan going to the Titans. I have the Titans trading back with the Raiders and getting them there. If the quarterback situation isn't great in Tennessee, but someone like Ted McMillan arrives, would you take Ted over him next year, Eric?
I mean, it entirely depends on where Tet's going, right? Tet could be another
Tennessee
example.
in this scenario. Tennessee in my made up
No,
scenario.
but I mean in fantasy drafts, right? Because it's the exact example of this, right? The
Fourth
best
round.
receiver
You're
in
on
the
the clock,
class.
Marv or Tet.
I'd probably go Tet.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Likewise.
Really?
I think he's a better prospect. Like I've said it on the show so many times. Marvin Harrison Jr.'s issue is not Kyler Murray, and it's really not the offensive coordinator's his inability to separate.
What do you like about Tet for fantasy purposes, Eric? Do you think you'll have more of a reception base probably? Do you think you'll have a higher floor?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a better prospect overall, like Steve mentioned, right? And this is a
Mhm.
Tennessee team that's going to be bad for a while and will need to throw. So I think he'll get a little bit of a boost from game script as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys playing that scenario with me. Let's go ahead though. Let's turn the gears here and shift into some between bets and start laying out our divisional round bets.
Between bets. Between bets.
All right, we're talking divisional round bets for the NFL playoffs. We're going to go through the various markets, starting with the ATS and money line picks. Steve, you are liking the Commanders this week here to potentially cover against the Detroit Lions. This is one of the heavy spreads. I was actually considering laying with the Lions. Why do you advise against that?
Because at the NFL level, plus 9.5, that is a huge, huge number, especially for two playoff teams. Like this is not an 0-16 team playing like a 16-0 team. This is a very good Commanders team playing a very good Lions team. To go plus 9.5, do you know how bad you have to lose? Like, think of how bad
Yeah,
teams got spanked.
the
Like,
Lions do it though. The
think
Lions
of how
do
bad
it.
the Eagles spanked the Packers. They won by 12.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was a kind of a competitive game. The Steelers only lost by 14, and that I
Right.
felt like they should have lost by fucking 20.
Right. It's hard to lose by double digits in the NFL.
Yeah.
It really is hard to lose by double digits in the NFL. This is,
Get-
I mean, this is a late field, like a nothing field goal costs you this spread.
Yeah,
A
a lot of backdoor
safety,
possibilities.
lot of ways to lose this bet. And that means there's a lot of ways to win this bet. I am happy. Giving me 9.5 points for an offense that has Jayden Daniels on it.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
I'd,
That's crazy.
I'd probably even play this like tease it up to plus 10.5, get yourself with the hook there. But I would definitely consider it. I like the Lions to win this game, and I like them to win it comfortably. But it is always tough to lay 9.5 in a divisional round game, especially against a red hot Commanders team. Eric, your thoughts on the Commanders here, and also you're going back with your Texans. You picked them on the money line, got that plus value last week against the Chargers. You like them plus 8.5 here against the Chiefs. So thoughts on the Commanders, and then your frisky Texans.
Yeah, love this call from Steve, right? For two playoff teams that have advanced to the second round, 10 points is just way too big a number, right? And they have a dynamic budding superstar in Jayden Daniels. I think that they can certainly keep this one competitive. And we know that Dan Quinn is going to continue to go for it on fourth down and to prioritize touchdowns over field goals. So I think there are just so many outs to this one.
Mm-hmm.
Similar line of thinking for my Texans getting 8.5 points at the Chiefs. I think the argument is really just far more practical, right? I said last week that the Texans should have been favorites on the strength of their defense alone, and that defense absolutely showed out. But more than anything, like this Chiefs team, they're trying to play one-score games. Like all but like 4 of their wins this year have been single scores or less. So I think that we've got a game plan advantage to where Kansas City, is not going for style points here. They know that, they just need to get the dub, survive in advance, and 8.5 points will certainly cover you when you have when they win that one score game. So not going to go money line on this one like I did last week, but 8.5 is just flatly too much.
Yeah, I wish I liked more spreads this week. Honestly, like I'm getting much more invested in the prop market just because this one feels really tricky to me because I agree with everything you're saying. I think your analysis is spot on. I rode the Texans, I remember ATS last year against the Ravens in this divisional round, and it was like they held in there for a while and things kind of just got out of hand in the second half. I feel like that maybe is what we could see happen here. Andy Reid has had a lot of time to sit on his hands and draw up some creative play calls here that I think could bust this one open. So it's tough, but I totally understand the logic from you. Yeah. Let's go ahead though. Steve, you're liking this game as well, but from a potential totals market standpoint. So tell us about that. What are you liking about the Texans Chiefs over 41 points?
Yeah, over 41.5 points that's a low number, right? Like I know these teams have good defenses, but that's 21 points apiece. Like that's not like that's pretty normal, right? In the NFL, I think the average, I don't know what the exact average points per game is, but I'm pretty sure it's over 21 points a game per team. So that would be a very low scoring game in a situation where, like, yeah, the defenses are good, but the offenses are good too. I do want to go back and give Eric his props on his bet. Again, these spreads are huge, way, way, way bigger than I'd take 8.5 points when the Jaguars were playing the Chiefs. So like this just feels like way too big of a spread. It's not like they're not playing Jags, like, not for lack of a better term, right? They're not playing like just absolute punks. So I like that. Over 41.5. Listen, CJ Stroud gets hot, and this team could put up 42 points by themselves. I mean, both these teams are, the Chiefs haven't scored over 30 this year, but the Texans are very good. And if both these teams just play average football, they beat the spread.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this total shakes out because 41.5 is a low number, but I mean, I think we are reminded with Algier back at linebacker for the Texans last week, how dominant this defense can be. Stingley looked great on the outside there, made multiple plays on the ball. I was also very impressed with Will Anderson Jr. The way him and Hunter kind of go together on that D line is scary. So all of a sudden, I'm starting to take the Texans real serious, and I think more than anything, maybe even better than the total. Maybe I am talking myself in the Texans. Maybe I am talking.
You have to. If Vegas feels like the line is 8.5 points, like Kansas City's not winning this game 9-0.
I think that's
like
another one I would
8.5
tease.
points. Like 8.5 points means points need to be scored enough so to create that gap, because this is not going to be a 9-0 game. So you're looking at what, 27 to 18 or something stupid like that.
Sure.
I don't know. Like, it has to be something, but you're going to get to this number.
Eric, staying in the totals market, you like Eagles Rams under 44.5. What are you seeing here in the city of brotherly love?
Yeah, this was a bet that I placed last week, and I'm going right back to the well. A lot of this is the strength of the Eagles defense, really since their bye week. They've just been playing on an absolute another planet, especially in their secondary. I do have to give flowers to Javon Curse and the defense for the LA Rams. Steve has been banging that drum for a while. Dude is playing absolutely lights out. But what I think is different here than what we saw in that Minnesota game is I don't think that you can abuse the Eagles offensive line the way that the Rams did against the Vikings. Mm-hmm. So I think this one is going to be a relatively closely contested game. I think it's going to be a lot of ball control. I think it's going to come in under 44.5.
Okay. And sticking with that game, I think that kind of builds on my first prop of the night that I'd like to throw out in the player prop market. It's Saquon Barkley over 99.5 rushing yards. This is minus 155 at ESPN bet. So yeah, a little bit heavy of a glass of juice to drink, but my thoughts here are a lot like yours, Eric. Like, more than anything, this is kind of a bet on the Eagles defense, right? Like, because I think they are good enough to slow down the Rams offense. Philly will get out to a lead. They'll want to run, chew the clock, just like they did last week against Green Bay. This line at most books is 111.5. And at ESPN, you can drink this juice to get it down to 99.5. We had the 98.5 line last week. Saquon, before that last drive, after that late interception from Jordan Love, was sitting at 98 yards. Yeah. And then he got over it on the first run, and then he had another one that got him well over it. But I think they're going to do even better of a job this week getting him involved. So I'm just going right back to it. He's hit this line in 8 of the last 10, 3 straight, including 255 against the Rams in week 12. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to saddle up here with Saquon Barkley, Steve.
I mean, until he proves otherwise, right? Why not? I mean, the guy's seems like he's a lock for 100 yards. I mean, if the lines are normally 111, Vegas has a real good history of being right around the right number. Usually, if you lose by 3 yards. So if they're spotting me 12 spots, I'm happy.
Yeah, I don't care. Like, I know a lot of people don't like to drink juice, but to me, especially coming from a very heavy.
Explain what that means, because that's a term I haven't heard that often.
Yes. So minus 155, you're paying 55 cents of juice to place this bet. That is just so most people know out there, because I guess I do throw that term around pretty loosely, but it's when you're taking negative money bets, you're drinking juice. And so minus 155 as opposed to minus 110, you have to pay more to play. And that's what we're doing here at this. Eric, I want to throw it over to you, though. I know you have, or was it Steve? Yeah, you have a player prop in here for us as well. Again, every time it's about Keon Coleman, I think it's Steve. So talk about Keon Coleman. You like him potentially going over his prop this week?
Yes, slightly going back to the well here. Last week, Khalil Shakir was my prop bet that cashed a ticket. This week, going to Keon Coleman over 22.5 receiving yards. Look, it has been a revolving door in this wide receiver room for the Buffalo Bills. But you look back to last week, and in most weeks, Keon Coleman is either 1 or 2 in snap share in terms of his opportunity and time on the field. So you like that. And specifically, he gets a beautiful matchup against Brandon Stevens of the Baltimore Ravens. credit to him. He has played a little bit better down the stretch run. He's not just, a complete liability back there, but a guy that can still get God. He's put up over 75 yards in his in the last 2 games, right? And is one of the leaders in receiving yards allowed. So like how this matchup, its individual matchup looks for Keon Coleman, especially in the context of him being out there a fair amount on Sunday.
Oh, okay. Steve, staying with the Buffalo Bills, you like James Cook over 12.5 rushing attempts. James Cook, I regretted it. I thought I should also dabble with his anytime TD because I felt like him or Josh Allen or both would find the end zone last week. I didn't get invested there with Cook, but the rushing attempts has been something very fun to bet this season. What do you like about Cook here going over this mark?
Yeah, the best way that teams can beat teams like the Ravens is to not let them have the ball, right? Like that's the number one way to beat this team. I'd be surprised if Ray Davis plays in this game, considering his brains nearly spilled out of his head in the last game, which, I hope he's fine. But if he's not, I expect James Cook to be used heavily. I also like Keon Coleman to be used heavily because they're going to need him more in this game, right? They kind of, once they got ahead, they stayed ahead, and it turned into a nothing burger last week. But they're going to want to control the clock. They're going to want to control and keep the ball more so out of Lamar's hands. And I think that's going to feed James Cook. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets 20 rushing attempts this game. Like, I think it'll approach that number.
Yeah, and I think when you're at this point in the season, like there comes a point, at least for me, especially in the running game, like of course you're gonna have to show some passing sets and run Ty Johnson out of there on a sweep, on a count, or something like that. But I think you get to a point where you got to have the ball in the hands of your best players, and that's James Cook. So I expect to see a heavy dose of him. 12.5 is a number I'm definitely going to give a look here. So I like that one as well. Eric, throwing it back to you, you are interested in a prop I've never bet in my life. I don't know if I would bet it, but talk about it here.
Yeah, now is your chance to dabble in this market. This is another prop that is a bit juicy, minus 135 to the under, and that is the total number of points between the total of punts, 6.5 between Tampa Bay and Detroit. I talked about it when Steve was making his salient case for taking the points with the Commanders this week. Neither of these teams punt, right? They're always going for it on 4th down. They're always trying to score a touchdown over a field goal. Really what this is I took a long, hard look at the game total in this one. 55.5 is a real big number. So I think that we're going to see a lot of scoring, and this is a great way to get into that kind of shootout game script without having to, be tied to such a big number.
Okay. Yeah. I don't hate that either. I think that's like, I like betting the overs at Ford Field this year. It's been a recipe for success. It's a fast track. We know that. So I'm interested in getting invested in that game, but it's such a high number that maybe taking the under on the punts isn't a bad call. So, and especially like you said, like Dan Campbell, we know like how many times are these guys going to punt? Like realistically, you know,
they're descending it. It's Jayden Daniels is the only quarterback with 3 starts where the team hasn't punted this year, right? Like,
yeah.
They just don't do it. So I think this is a way to get into that shootout scenario without having to be tied to such a big number.
Okay. Steve, throwing it back to you, staying with this game, or sorry, going to the other AFC game here. You oh no, I'm all messed up because I think okay, sorry. I'm all messed up on that one.
We're staying in that game.
Yeah,
the graphic was wrong, but we're staying.
Yeah, okay, that's what it was because we had Tampa Bay. I was like, Tampa Bay is not playing this week, so
Tampa Bay is not playing.
Yeah, going up against them, the Commanders. You like Jayden Daniels over 1.5 passing touchdowns. What are you thinking here with JD Honey?
That he's the 4th best quarterback in the league, or 5th best quarterback in the league, and he is playing at a bona fide racetrack in terms of just how fast the ball moves up and down that field. Listen. This is a proverbial dick measuring contest between these two head coaches. Like Dan Quinn and Dan Campbell, they will look each other dead in the eye on their own 5-yard line and be like, I'm going for it on 4th and 15. And I wouldn't be shocked by either of them doing that, right? Dan Campbell's the guy who we know fakes punts on his own 25-yard line. I mean, that's just what we got out of these guys. Jayden Daniels is a generational talent, right? Like we say that And we throw that term around a lot, but he's just that good. We're not seeing guys doing what he's doing this early in their careers. It's almost unheard of. 1.5 passing touchdowns against a bad defense. I like that. A defense that doesn't have like half their starters, their entire defensive line has been replaced. He's going to have time. I do want to go back to my previous bet and just let you guys know that I did the research. If the Chiefs and the Texans just score their average points, they will score 45 points between the two of them. The over-under is 41. Again, I want to go back to that and just let you guys know that. But Jayden Daniels, 1.5 passing touchdowns. Listen, Terry McLaurin may well get 3 touchdowns all on his own the way this guy explodes for touchdowns, right? I mean, we know when they get down there, yes, they do run it in quite a bit, but Zach Ertz and Terry McLaurin are red zone threats at this point. And you can't count out Dyami Brown being a long touchdown threat, right? Like 1.5, if he flukishly gets 1 touchdown on the first drive, you're feeling great. And it's not unheard of for this to happen. So I think this is a game that has a lot of points projected, and I doubt they're all going to come on the ground.
Yeah, usually starts out well in that scripted game plan, as you said on those first couple of drives. So don't mind that play at all. I wish I would have taken that last week because I did end up dabbling for just about a quarter of a unit on his anytime touchdown line out there. So I'm going to stay with this game on a player you recommended, Steve. Dyami Brown, over 2.5 receptions, -150. This is at Bet365. I want to attack a game with a 55.5 point total on that fast track we talked about at Ford Field. This wide receiver corpse is now mostly just Dyami Brown, Zacchaeus, McLaurin. They've really kind of filtered out the other guys, and these are their main targets. He's averaging 4.6 targets in the last 5 games. He has hit this line in the last 5 games. That's also why you're paying some juice on this one at -150. So I'm playing that there. Individually, I'm also going to be playing Jameson Williams over 3.5 receptions. This is -140 at FanDuel. The evolution of Jameson Williams has happened, and it feels like no one freaking cares because over 1,000 receiving yards this season. He's playing the same amount of snaps, almost identical over the last 4 weeks to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And while I would usually just like take the receiving yards line, the Lions have really condensed this offense. And since week 2, JMO, he has 7 or more targets in 6 out of 7 games. He's hit this line in all of those. I expect Ben Johnson, give him a week off. I'll probably also take a little bit of parlay action with that receiving yards line. It is right around 51.5 at most books. Maybe tease that down, but Ben Johnson's going to get JMO the ball in his hands in short yardage, probably on some trick plays deep as well. And so for my Seth's good shit of the week parlay presented by today's country music, I'm going JMO over 3.5 receptions. I'm going Dyami Brown over 2.5 receptions. I'm taking the Lions on the money line. That's giving us plus 212 at DraftKings Sportsbook. So giddy up, boys. Players no one's really thinking to play here. I'm taking a little bit different approach. I usually like to count on studs, but I'm counting on 2 guys who they're doing something for their squads in a game where, hey, we think points are aplenty.
I like it. Jameson Williams, what an ugly 1,000-yard season this was. Like
53 receptions. That's the whole thing. But
yeah, this has to be the ugliest 1,000-yard receiving season, like maybe of all time, because he did not look great for most of the season. So I'm not in love with this.
He looked good. He just had big games and then he had down games. So towards the end of the season, Eric, JMO really started to find somewhat of a balance where he was catching more than 2 passes a week, just based on 6 out of the last 7. He's had 7 or more targets and he is delivering them, at least catching 3 or 4 balls a week.
Yeah, he showed some nice floor down the stretch run, which previously wasn't associated with this game. And, specifically this parlay, I love that you have 3 heavy favorites that you're parlaying together and getting a pretty nice plus number on. So these are the type of bets that I love to speculate with.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, a great time tonight. Loved breaking down everything with y'all. Make sure if you guys are new to the channel and you enjoy this type of content, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe as well. It's the easiest way to support what we're doing here at IBT Media. Got some big stuff coming around the corner. Make sure you guys are keeping up with Eric and Steve on their socials. Also, make sure you guys are, if you ever see our guy Kyle Scott out in the street, make sure you give him a wave. Yinzer Ginger icon. Kyle, thanks for your time tonight, man, and best of luck to the Penguins in hockey season, man. Let's go Pens, baby.
Let's go Pens.
Let's go Pens. All right, y'all. That's all for us tonight. Thank you so much for Steve Lawson and Eric Romoff and Kyle Scott. I'm Seth Wilcock. Enjoy the divisional round. We'll catch you next week. Until then, y'all know what to do. Keep it in between. Thank you.